Thank you for joining this. We decided to put this webinar together for a couple of reasons. When I did my last webinar, fact versus fiction, I put a question out there asking what sort of topic people would want me to talk about, chat through, and fire safety came out on top of that poll. So I've listened and I've put that webinar together now to hopefully satisfy those queries, concerns around this topic. The other reason why we've done it as well is based on some trends we've identified looking at CQC HIW reports, which I'll go through a little bit in detail on a few slides' time. So let's have a look then, shall we? So a little bit about myself first. For you who don't know me, who haven't joined one of my previous webinars, I've been working in the dental sector for around 10 years now. Predominantly as a health and safety advisor, but I've also been supporting compliance teams. So I've got a range of knowledge across the compliance remit. And I've been doing physical risk assessments across the UK as well. So all regions of the UK, I've gone out to dental practices and carried out quite a few, including fire risk assessments. So it ties nicely into this webinar. What we're going to be doing today is looking at various areas of fire safety. As you can see here, the agenda goes through quite a few topics, quite a few different areas of fire compliance. So hopefully by the end of this, any concerns, queries you may have had, I would have answered. So the first thing I want to do is just have a look at the statistics for fire-related incidents across the UK. So the little table here you can see on your screen is table 1 to 13, and you can see the total number of fire-related incidents across the business sector. Down the right-hand side, you can see what all 13 of those sectors are. So I just want to open up a little poll for you, just out of pure interest, to see where you think healthcare fits in that table. So from 1 to 13, where is healthcare in relation to the number of fire-related incidents that have been reported? Now, healthcare is quite a broad sector. Obviously, a lot of these fire-related incidents are predominantly come from the hospital or medical centre areas, but dental practices, GPs, care homes, that sort of thing will also fall into this bracket. So if we just have a quick look and see what's coming back, 10, 6, 10, 8, 10. Okay, so quite a variation of where you think we sit. So let's have a look. So for those of you who said 8, you are correct. We are in 8th place, 578 fire-related incidents that have been reported. Okay, so quite middle of the table. Okay, not quite as bad as your private non-residential with over 3,000, but this puts it into perspective of where we are. Okay, and out of those 578 incidents, 46 people were injured as a result of the fire, and unfortunately, one person was killed. So again, there are impacts of it happening. But what I want to do now, just to put a little bit more perspective on this, is have a look at deliberate fires. Okay, so the way that fire statistics are broken down is they look at accidental and deliberate. So that 578 will be split between accidental and deliberate fires. So again, I'm going to put a quick poll in, and I want you to tell me where you think healthcare now sits in relation to deliberate fires. So are we staying at 8th? Are we moving down, or are we moving up? So a deliberate fire also includes arson, and the definition of the two are there on your screen for you to see. Okay, so deliberate fire, people setting fire to wheelie bins, having a bit of a laugh and chuckle about that. But arson is where they where they start fires with the intent to hurt someone or to make damage to the property. So again, quite a few variations. Someone's gone down to 13th, put us at the bottom. Someone's taken us to the top. Okay, so we are based 4th now. Okay, so if we look at the total number of fires, 478, we can see that 222 of those are deliberate. Okay, So just putting in this into perspective a little bit more and having a look at the ratio, out of the 578 fires that occurred in healthcare, 38% of those are due to a deliberate or arson. So that's quite important, because even though we're initially quite low down on that list, it shows that the risk is in relation to possibly disgruntled people, whether that be a patient, a visitor, or even a staff member. People starting fires in healthcare is where we need to look at and be very much aware of. So what I've put here is a little statement. This was taken from a news item. I've blanked out the actual practice details because I don't want to shine a light on them, but this just shows that arson is a problem in the dental sector. Excuse me. And it does occur. So whilst we may have all the measures in place to protect our property, we have to consider external factors that pose a risk to us, our patients, and anyone else that may be present in our practices. So what I want to do now is look at how the CQC and HIW look at this. So I understand there are a few members or people here from Scotland. So I do apologise in advance that I haven't got trends for your area. Unfortunately, we just don't have the data to hand for Scottish trends. CPI don't publish their reports online, and HIS, their reports are very few and far between at the moment, so I haven't been able to collect that data. But the rest of these slides and the rest of the information I go through does apply to Scotland, because the general framework for managing fire is very, very similar to England and Wales. So everything else is applicable to you guys. So from an England perspective, what we do behind the scenes as a business is we look at 10 reports every month to do a bit of a trend analysis, identify gaps, identify trends, to see what the CQC are looking at and what areas they're concerned with. We also do this for Wales. They don't have 10 reports every month because obviously there's not as many practices in Wales as there is in England. So you can see with the Wales trends, there was only 4 reports published in January. There was only 5 published in February, 1 published in March and April. So again, we haven't got a consistent approach across Wales, but we're still doing that trend analysis to see what comes through. So if we look at the trends and focus purely on fire, we can see that there's been a consistent increase in fire-related focus across England practices. In January, February, there was a couple of instances of concerns raised, but then across March, April, and May and June, there was a consistent elevation in focus on fire safety. In Wales, we can see a consistent approach. So they're looking at fire every time they do an inspection, and they are raising concerns as a result of that. So next, I want to look at the individual areas of concern. What pieces of evidence do CQC or HIW look at when they do their inspections? So again, down the left-hand side of these graphs, you can see all the pieces of evidence that they will look at, and they will ask for you to demonstrate how you're managing that in practice. So again, I've got a nice little poll just to understand or to try and get a feel for where your mindsets are with this. And I want to know what you think are the problem areas. So out of that list you can see on the graphs, what areas of concern are inspectors regularly flagging up? What comes out on top? So if you just want to have a quick poll, have a look at that, put in your responses, and it'd be interesting to see your views on it. I'll just wait for those figures to go up a little bit before I show you what the graphs portray. So what have we got here? We got fire training at the moment. That's going up. Fire checklists, fire risk assessments. That's the top at the moment, 36%, followed by fire drills, emergency lights. Okay, so it's still going up. So a couple more seconds just to see if there's any changes in that. So what we got now? We got fire risk assessments, 27, fire training, 33, fire drills, 23. So those are the top 3: assessments, training, and drills. Okay, so let's have a look. get my graph to work. Right, so here we go. So in England, their problem area is fire checklists. Okay, that's come out on top. So of 70 reports we've looked at, over 40 of those reports have flagged the checklist up as a concern. So that's the in-house monitoring, that is. That's you doing your in-house safety checks, visual inspections on your equipment, which again, I'll go into in a little bit more detail further on. Followed by the fire risk assessment, followed by the fire procedures and training. In Wales, fire risk assessment and training are the problem areas. So again, you can see it from an inspection point of view, what they're looking at, where their concerns come from. So let's have a look at these topics then in detail. Okay, and the first one I want to start with is fire risk assessments. Okay, so a fire risk assessment, the purpose of that in healthcare is to protect life. That's really, really important to understand because there's two different objectives. The other objective is to protect property. However, in healthcare, that doesn't apply. Fire risk assessments to protect property are more to do with your, say, a large service center where you've got a lot of specialist equipment, not a lot of people in that building. So the purpose of that assessment is to protect the equipment in the building. Whereas in healthcare, we are all about protecting the people that are going to be present, especially in relation to the patients who could be vulnerable, young, have mental impairments. So there's a lot of factors that we need to consider. So the purpose is to protect life. When you do a fire risk assessment, the aim of it is to identify the hazards, but also to identify and confirm the precautionary measures that are needed to control those hazards. So a fire risk assessment must be undertaken by someone that has the skills, knowledge, and understands the relevant legislation, all the company guidance, the technical specifications of fire, to understand what precautionary measures are needed for their particular premise. So just to give you an example, when we talk about identifying the hazards in a dental practice, we are thinking about the things such as pressure vessels. So a pressure vessel is your autoclaves and compressors, things that build up a lot of pressure inside them, and if they're not maintained or looked after, they could potentially explode. We've got electrical equipment, we've got fuse boards, we've got a lot of electrical appliances around our practices. We've got flammable substances, cleaning materials, we've got dental products like Cavo spray, which is flammable, alcoholic hand gel, flammable. So again, lots of different substances we've got to be aware of. We've got dental equipment, we've got x-ray equipment. Some practices use lasers, so that's a fire risk. And then we've got combustible load as well, so a lot of storage in the practice. And in the example you can see there, this is something I've come across a lot of times on my journeys. Your attic spaces where you're storing all your Christmas decorations, stock and archive, and then in some cases you've got your compressor suction motors up there as well. So all these sort of things are your hazards. Okay, so your fire risk assessment will identify those hazards and then determine what sort of measures are needed to control them. So it will dictate what sort of fire alarm system you should have in place to manage those risks. It should identify what sort of compartmentation you need in place to prevent fire from spreading and smoke from spreading from one area to the other. So again, if you've got potentially hazardous equipment underneath the only stairwell in your premise, you need to make sure that that stairwell is protected. So if there is a fire, it's not going to be compromised, which then could trap people in the building. The same with walls. You need to make sure that the structural integrity of your walls and ceilings are suitable for the rooms that house various pieces of equipment. You've got to make sure that the fire risk assessment identifies that there's no gaps in ceilings or walls to allow smoke to escape and spread from one area to the other area of the building. And you will also need to identify the level of lighting that you need in place to enable a safe evacuation from the premise. So again, if you've got quite a compact building with not a lot of natural lighting, you will need to supplement that with artificial lighting, known as emergency lighting. And you will also need to identify your means of escape, how you can get out of that building, how many exits you have from the premise. All these things are encompassed into the fire risk assessment. It's not just a tick box exercise. It is to dictate what you need to protect the occupants of that building and make sure that they can get out of that building if there is a fire. So this is something that we come across a lot. Risk assessments are done in various different ways and methods. Some people do undertake them in-house, some people outsource them to external experts. But however you do it, that assessment has to be undertaken by someone who's competent. And that also applies to external people as well. They need to be competent to do it. So you need to cross-check that whoever you're getting in place to do your assessment has the relevant qualifications, skills, and experience to do it. So a very quick question on that. I just want to understand who here feels competent to undertake their own fire risk assessment. So if someone asks you, and I don't know if you are doing that at the moment in-house, but if you are, or if someone asks you, would you feel competent to do it yourself? So if you can just answer that poll for me, it'd be interesting just to gauge your views on that. Okay. And again, I'm not saying this to detract away from any of you who may be competent to do. I'm not saying that everyone isn't competent, because everyone's got different backgrounds. If I was a practice manager, having done over 300 fire risk assessments, I would be competent to do one myself. So there will be different levels of knowledge and experience out there in the dental world. So it is very important to understand that this is quite a key factor when it comes to doing assessments. So we've got 68% of you at the moment feel competent to do it. 32% feel confident. 69% don't feel competent. Okay. So that's just to link into the next slide here, because I want to show you what the inspectors feel on this. Okay. And lack of competency is, unfortunately, the single biggest compliance failure when it comes to fire risk assessments. Okay. And you can see the inspectors' feedback here. So this is part of our trend analysis as well, to identify what it is that they look at and what they're flagging up that they're concerned with. So again, I'm not saying that all of you are not competent to do it, but this is to give you an example of the areas of concern from an inspector's point of view. And you can see here that the general pattern and the general trend from their feedback is that where they've identified issues with the fire risk assessments, it generally comes down to the person who has done it. Okay, so 5 quotes here, all on a similar trend, that the assessments haven't been undertaken by someone with the relevant skills. So if you are appointing someone to do it, whether that's in-house or externally, please make sure that they've got that knowledge and understand the requirements of them. Okay, so just leave that a couple of seconds just for you to digest those quotes, and then I'll move on now. Okay. So let's have a look at what must be in place. So you've done your fire risk assessment, you've identified the hazards, you've identified the precautionary measures that are applicable to your building and premise. So you are legally required to have in place suitable firefighting equipment. Okay, so that's a must, and this all comes under the Fire Reform Act. So what does that consist of? So the majority of you will be familiar with portable firefighting equipment. So these are your fire extinguishers. You do have fixed firefighting equipment, such as sprinkler systems. They are few and far between. I have come across a few dental practices with sprinkler systems, but in the majority, you will be familiar with portable fire extinguishers. And there are various types of extinguishers as shown on your screen here. Your red extinguishers are your water extinguishers. Your black ones are your CO2. Your blue are your powder extinguishers. Your cream are your foam extinguishers. Your yellow are your wet chemical. And then you've also got fire blankets. So not all of these extinguishers will be relevant to our premises, to a dental practice. So we exclude powder and wet chemical. What you should have in place is a Class A or Class B extinguisher. So either a water, a CO2, a foam, or a combination of them. Okay. Wet chemical, which is what the yellow extinguisher that I've taken off, they're more suited to your big catering industries because they're suitable for dealing with deep fat fires and where you've got lots and lots of oil in place. Now, your powder extinguishers, some of you may have a powder extinguisher in the premises, but a powder extinguisher is not ideal for indoor use, especially in confined spaces. The powder that it releases, it can cause visual impairments. It can actually jeopardize the escape from the building because it will fill up the room with the powder. It can also cause health problems as well if you breathe in the contents of that. So powder are only ideal for outdoor areas like garages or where you've got that big open area space. So really, you should have either a water, CO2, foam, or a combination of them. Your portable extinguishers, they must be available on all floors. So if you've got 3 stories to your practice, you must have a combination of extinguishers on every single floor in your building. The extinguishers must also be accessible. So they should be where you can visually see them and quickly retrieve them in an emergency. They shouldn't be held in cupboards or behind doors or any other inconspicuous locations. And they must be indicated by signs. So every extinguisher must be supplemented with a little ID sign, usually displayed above it on the stand or on the wall. And again, that's to enable people to identify where those extinguishers belong if they are moved in the event that they're needed. They must also be located at a convenient height. So that all extinguishers should be on a stand or be wall mounted, but the handle should be at a convenient height where you can grab it easily. Not too high, not too low, especially for your smaller CO2 extinguishers. And they should all be within a suitable travel distance from the fire risk. So a Class A extinguisher should be no more than 30 meters from the potential risk, and a CO2 extinguisher for electrical fires should be no more than 10 meters from the risk. If, however, you need to travel through doors to get to your extinguishers, then those distances need to be reduced accordingly. Again, all of this should be encompassed within your fire risk assessment. That should look at the coverage you have in place, the location of your extinguishers, and verify whether or not that is suitable. You can also speak to your fire extinguisher servicing company, who can undertake a survey of your premises to ensure that you've got the extinguishers in the right locations and right places. So the next thing I want to look at is fire detectors and alarms. So again, as per the Reform Act, every premises must have a suitable fire detectors and alarms in place. But the definition of this does vary. So I'm going to look at both these options. The first one is a non-automatic system. So these systems are very, very basic, and I have come across them in my experience. And they consist of no automatic detection. So the occupants of the building, the onus is on them to identify a fire and to then raise the alarm. And they can raise the alarm through blowing a whistle, sounding a horn, ringing a bell, or verbal methods. But these systems are very, very basic, and they can potentially cause problems in delayed evacuation. Because by the time you actually identify a fire and then raise the alarm by going and finding the whistles, finding the horns, or shouting, you are naturally delaying how quickly that process can start. So ideally, these sort of non-automatic systems are only suitable for small single-story premises where the identification of a fire is evident, and the method then of raising it can be done quickly and efficiently. The more suitable system that you should have in place is an automatic system. So these contain detectors that will automatically trigger following a fire being present, and then will sound the alarm throughout the building. So it's instant. It will trigger the alarm and sound the warning instant. This then allows you to start the evacuation process and get everyone out the building quickly. There are a couple of categories of automatic systems, and I'll go through these briefly with you. An L5 system, so again, it's important to understand what the L stands for, and that stands for life. So as I've said with the fire risk assessment, is to protect life. These sort of automatic systems are, again, to protect life. So an L5 system is a custom installation. This means that you will have detectors installed at various locations throughout your building that doesn't meet or follow any specific criteria. An L4 system means that you'll have detectors installed in escape routes only. So just your corridors, your stairwells, nowhere else. An L3 system means you will have detectors installed in escape routes and rooms adjoining the escape route. An L2 system, again, you will have detectors installed in escape routes, rooms adjoining escape routes, and areas of a high risk. So in a dental practice, an area of high risk could be a decontamination room. It could be a cellar if your cellar houses a lot of electrical equipment or plant equipment or stock and archive. And then an L1 system is your all singing, all dancing. It has detectors installed throughout your premise in all rooms. So again, when you look at a detection, fire alarm and detection system, what you need is determined by the level of risk. So it is determined by your fire risk assessment. If you put a detection in place without considering the risks or without assessing them as part of your risk assessment, you will have to justify how you come to that conclusion. So just to put this in perspective a little bit more, when it comes to healthcare, HTM 0503, which is about fire safety in healthcare premises, does advise that an L2 or L3 system should be provided for healthcare premise. So as a very minimum, you should have an L2 or L3 system in place. An L1 system is what you would find in hospitals, for example. But that is your bare minimum system that you should be trying to achieve. Okay. If you've got any other system in place, then please make sure that it has been assessed as part of your fire risk assessment and been signed off as suitable for your needs. And then the last thing I'm going to look at is emergency lighting. So whilst this isn't fire and fire detection, it does link in. So emergency lighting systems must be in place. But again, the definition of emergency lighting is open to interpretation. So the Fire Reform Act, as well as the workplace welfare regulations, state that emergency lighting must be provided for emergency routes, exits, and any room where persons may be exposed to danger. So, for example, that could be a decontamination room. You've got to think about if there was a sudden blackout in your premise, are persons at risk wherever they may be located at that time of the blackout? So in a decontamination room, that could be treated as a dangerous area because of the sharps risks you have, because you've got steam generated equipment in there. So if there's a blackout and people are trying to find their way out of the room and putting their hands everywhere, they could be exposed to potential sharps injuries and other things. So that could be a dangerous area. Now, emergency lighting must be appropriate to the building, must be appropriate for the layout, and ideally it should be fully automatic. So like the fire alarm, you can get manual systems, torches, sensor lights, but they all involve the human element. You've got to be able to find those in the event of a power failure. You've got to switch them on. You've got to then walk around the premises to try and find your way out using the torch as your method of gauging a safe evacuation. Those sort of things could delay the evacuation process, particularly for members of the public, patients, visitors who are not familiar with your premise. They won't have a torch to hand when they come in. So if they're in the toilet, for example, and the lights go out, they're going to be in darkness. And that could potentially result in unnecessary anxiety, stress, panic, that sort of thing for people. So healthcare should really be looking at an automatic system. But again, if you've got anything other than an automatic system, please make sure that has been signed off and assessed as part of your fire risk assessment, because again, you would have to justify why you've put those systems in place. So I'm just going to look at this from the healthcare inspector's point of view again. So here's our two inspectors. Let's see what they've got to say about it. So again, these are all genuine quotes. And again, the pattern here is that where these systems have been put in place that are not fully automatic, don't meet the requirements of L2 or L3 from a fire alarm, the justification. They haven't been assessed or tested as part of the risk assessment. So that's the general trend you can see in these quotes. But a couple of things here that it does flag out. Okay, air horns used, emergency lighting, again, handheld battery torches. What we got here, there was, battery operated smoke alarm. When it was sounded, it came apart. So again, not suitable for the premise. So again, these are the sort of things, and inspectors will look at this. They will ask to see your fire risk assessment. They will look at the actions that come out of that to see how you manage them. But if you haven't got a suitable fire risk assessment in place, they will make their own judgments then on what systems you've got in place. And if you haven't got the justification or evidence to show them or satisfy them of why you put those in place, it will be flagged up as an issue on your reports. So what I want to have a look at now is fire maintenance. So I'm just playing around with the polls a minute. Right. So fire maintenance. There are two elements to this in a dental practice. We've got PPM, which is planned preventative maintenance. This is where someone will be contracted, an external service provider, to come into your premise and visually inspect and test your equipment. So your portable equipment or firefighting equipment, your alarm systems or your emergency lighting systems. Now, it's key to understand that if you haven't got an automatic fire alarm or automatic emergency light system, PPM doesn't apply. You don't need someone external to check those systems. But that has to be done in-house instead. But if you've got an automatic system, then you must have someone in place to maintain those systems accordingly. So firefighting equipment must be maintained every 12 months. Automatic fire alarm systems must be maintained every 6 months. And emergency lighting must be maintained every 12 months. So if you are outside of these testing remits for your equipment, then you need to speak with your service provider and you need to look at your fire risk assessment. Because again, if your fire alarms are tested every 12 months, then what's the justification for that? Why is it 12 months instead of 6 months? There may be a reason, but that will be determined by the level of risk and the assessment. So please make sure that they all tie in with what is required of you. The other element of this then, maintenance, is in-house monitoring. So this goes back to that common trend that we identified at the start of this. For England, your in-house checklist came out as the most problematic area. So this is something that they're looking for evidence that you've got in place. This is where someone is nominated at practice level to have a look at all the equipment, to undertake visual inspections, undertake simple tests of the equipment to verify that they're in good working order. This would normally be your fire marshal, but it could be another nominated person. If your premises is shared or your equipment is shared, you're in a multi-occupancy building, then those tests may be undertaken by the facilities manager or the landlord. So you need to verify who's doing those tests and ask for evidence that they got them in place and they're doing them accordingly. So again, extinguishers need to be tested in-house, or not tested, checked in-house every month. Check they're present, they're not prone to damage, they haven't been moved, that everything is in place. Your alarms need to be tested every week. So if you've got manual call points, the little red box with the push button, you should be testing one of those, a different one of those on a rotational basis every single week. So over the course of 12 months, every call point has been tested at least once. And the same with emergency lighting. If you've got an automatic system in place, there should be a test facility somewhere within your premise. You should have a little key that you slot into that test facility, switch it up, your emergency light should come on. That's called a function test to show that they're working. So again, you should be doing these. If you're not familiar with how to test your alarms or your emergency lighting, speak to your service providers. They will come in, they will show you, they will give you the equipment if you're missing the keys to do those tests, and they will train you on how to do it. The results of those tests should then be documented. This is the key piece of evidence that inspectors look for. They won't be happy with verbal confirmation that you're doing these. They want to see it all written down. So hopefully you have got a designated fire logbook in place. Fire logbooks can be provided by the service providers, by the fire authority, Or if you're an iComply member or iManage member, you will have access to the fire log within our system. So again, you need to make sure you are recording the outputs of these logs. And looking at this from an inspector's point of view again, this is what they're key to see. The trend here with all these quotes is that the results of those inspections are not being documented and recorded. They haven't been able to satisfy the inspectors that they are doing them. And as I said, inspectors won't just be happy with verbal confirmation that you're doing these tests. So please record them down to show to inspectors that you are undertaking them. So then we look at the fire procedures. So you've got your fire alarms in place, you've got your emergency lighting, your portable equipment, you're doing the testing and maintenance of that equipment. You also need to ensure you have procedures in place to ensure evacuation can be managed effectively. The procedures should be written down as well, and those procedures should then be used to train staff, particularly new staff that come into your employment, on what they need to do, how you manage fire risk in your premise. So the method of fire detection, all these bullet points now are things that should be included within those procedures. So the method of fire detection is how is fire detected in your building? Is that done through an automatic system or through the human element, relying on people to identify fire? Raising the alarm. So again, how does that system work in your premise? You need to write this down so people understand that, they can read it and know how it works. So is that the automatic detection system? Does that provide the audible warning? Or is this where you use bells, whistles, horns, or verbal method? You also need to identify as part of those procedures your escape routes and exits. So most people coming into the premises will be very familiar with the front door, whatever primary entrance they use to come in and out of the building. But there may be other exits or doors leading in and out of the premises that people also need to be familiar with. So if that primary exit is compromised in any way, they're aware of where else to go to get out of the building. The method of evacuating the building. So how do you manage that? What is the nearest exit at every location within your building? If you're up on the second floor and you've got an external escape stair, then that is your primary exit route. So again, the method of evacuating, where you need to go in the event of a fire based on where you may be located at any particular moment in time. The location of the assembly point needs to be documented as well as part of your procedures. And again, this is a common area that I see practices going wrong. Your assembly point should ideally be no less than 50 meters away from the building. Okay? And this primarily is to avoid issues, especially if you've got a multi-story building. If there's a fire on the upper floors, the heat from that fire could result in the windows exploding essentially. So if you're less than 50 meters away from the building, you could be at risk then from glass coming down on you, raining down on you. It's also when you locate the assembly point, you need to ensure that you're not obstructing the fire services on their arrival. So don't go standing in the driveway where they may need to access or get into. And the other thing as well is to ensure that you're not crossing busy roads if you can avoid it, because you will be escorting a lot of people from the premises and helping them out, including children, elderly, vulnerable people. So try to avoid crossing busy roads. And point your assembly point in a safe location at a sufficient distance from the building. You need to look at the responsibilities for sweeping the premise. So again, don't put all that responsibility on your fire marshals. Responsibility is a team job, and it works better as a team job as well, because your dentist, for example, will be automatically responsible for patients in their surgery. If they're treating a patient, they will evacuate their surgery and take that patient out with them. Your receptionist will be the same for the reception area. They will automatically be in that location, so they can take responsibility for that area and help escort people out. So by segregating the areas you practice up ensures that sweeping can be done quickly, efficiently, and you're not relying on one person to try and run around the building like a headless chicken, trying to look in all areas, all rooms. So split the sweeping process out to accommodate your needs. And then arrangements for tackling a fire. So again, if you've got trained fire marshals on site, they should be trained in how to do this, and they should feel confident in how to do this. But we don't want fire marshals to be heroes. We don't want them to act as the fire brigade. If you've got a fire in your premises, which is no bigger than a waste paper bin size, then your fire marshal should feel confident to try and tackle that to avoid it from escalating and growing and getting out of hand. Anything outside of that, anything bigger than that, they should just focus on helping with the evacuation of the premise. So again, look at your arrangements for tackling the fire and who is suitable to do that. And then the responsibilities of key staff. So I've already touched on a few of these. Your fire marshals, what are their responsibilities? Your dentists with regards to helping patients. Your receptionists with regards to looking after the reception area. But you may have other responsibilities as well. The day list. The day list is quite a common thing that people forget about. Who's going to print out and take out the day list with them so they can then do a head count at the assembly point to find out if anyone's missing. So again, look at responsibilities of your staff and try and factor that into your procedures as well. And then the method of evacuating vulnerable persons. So anyone with a disability is classed as a vulnerable person. We need to get them out, but they may need or may have specialist requirements to help them evacuate the premises. So you need to consider those as part of your procedures. And then equipment isolation. So you may have, if you use Bunsen burners in your premises, then you need to ensure that when you evacuate, you isolate that supply. So any hazardous equipment like that, you need to have those isolation arrangements as part of your procedures. And then also you need to cover off then how you liaise and communicate with the fire services. Who is responsible for that? Is it your fire marshal? Is it your practice manager? Is it your principal dentist? Who's responsible for meeting and greeting them and communicating any risk to them? You may also need to communicate if people are unaccounted for, if people refuse to leave the premise, because you can't physically escort someone from the building. So if someone refuses, you need to report that to the emergency services. So you need to have that in place. And then finally, contingency plans. So if you've got automatic fire detection systems in place, but they're not working, that they're in disrepair, they're faulty, what are the contingency plans, especially from an insurance point of view? What contingency do you have in place that are required by your practice insurers? If you haven't got a working fire alarm system, that may impact your insurance. So please speak to your insurance providers to understand how they want these sort of situations to be managed and put those into your contingency plans. So something that people get confused with is fire action notice. A fire action notice is not a fire emergency procedure, as I just discussed on the previous slide. These are simple instructions to benefit people who are unfamiliar with the premise, such as visitor contractors and patients. So they usually come in A5 size little PVC boards that you can buy online from numerous suppliers, and you would stick those to your walls next to your manual call points. Very, very simple instructions telling people what to do and how to evacuate, essentially. Okay? You need to have these in place to supplement your fire procedures, not as a replacement of the fire procedures. So they go hand in hand. These are for people unfamiliar with the premises. The detailed fire procedures that I've gone through are for your staff awareness, staff training, and to satisfy inspectors that you've got those procedures in place. So this is our template here that we've got in iComply that any of our members can access and use. This particular template has been created more to put in a public-facing area, such as on a patient notice board, to give them that little bit more information on what you guys do and how you can manage it. And it can be tailored as well to your requirements. If you're buying the small A5 notices from suppliers, please make sure that you buy one that enables you to put in key pieces of information, like the location of your fire assembly point. If you buy one that just says report to fire assembly point, that's not very helpful because it doesn't tell people where that is. Then the next one we have is your PEEP. So I've discussed this as part of your procedures, but again, a PEEP, which is a personal emergency evacuation plan, is a tailored plan around vulnerable people. okay, is to accommodate their own specific needs, what help they need in the event of a fire. But it mustn't be assumed that everyone with a disability will require a personal plan. Most people with disability will be able to vacate the premises on their own accord without help or assistance. This poster is called a standard PEEP, and it should be put in place again in a patient-facing area to highlight to patients what processes you have in place to help them. So the things listed on here are your standard procedures, which generally will be chaperoning. If someone needs help, a member of the team will chaperone them and help them out of the building. But this enables patients to look at those procedures and identify whether they don't feel happy with those, comfortable with them, or whether there's anything additional they need. And they can then come and ask you for help if need be. If they come and ask you for help going on, these procedures you've got in place at the moment don't work for me, I need something else, then you would take them aside, have a consultation with them, identify their needs, and put in a personal plan for that patient. You would then train staff on that personal plan so they understand their responsibilities to help those patients get out of the building. So evacuation drills, these form part of your procedures and they must be undertaken. And the purpose of that is to rehearse the procedures as well as the PEEPs I've just talked about. If you don't undertake drills, people won't be comfortable with what they need to do and they won't fully understand their responsibilities. So please make sure you do drills and those drills reflect your procedures and personal plans that you may have in place. The maximum time frame for drills is 12 months. You should be undertaking drills every 12 months, and that's what inspectors will look for. However, as best practice, you should really try and undertake drills twice in the year. And the reason for that is because not every member of staff will be present when you undertake that 12-monthly fire drill due to illness, annual leave. So by undertaking more than one drill in every 12-month period, it means that you can encompass every team member in at least one fire drill in every 12 months. You should also try and incorporate role play scenarios into your fire drills, make them a bit fun. I know practices that have used teddy bears, put teddy bears in different locations in the premises with a little note around their neck saying, "Help me, I'm hard of hearing," or "I've got a mobility issue," to see then how team members deal with that. I've also known another practice where an actual dental practitioner faked a faint during an evacuation to see how staff would react to that. So again, you can encompass lots of things into your drills to make them a little bit more engaging, and inspectors love role play. So if you can show that you're doing these sort of things, that will get them on board straight away. When it comes to drills, try and keep them anonymous. Don't let all your team members know that you're doing a drill because they'll be ready and prepared to do it. You want to try and catch them off guard to understand how they would react in a serious incident. And you should try and incorporate patients into those drills as well. So you can talk to your patients before you do a drill to make them aware that you're doing it, so you don't want to disrupt their day. Give them a heads up, and if they're happy, then involve them into the drill themselves. If they're not happy, avoid doing the drill at that time. Fire marshals. So again, you must have suitable number of persons competent to help you implement all the fire safety arrangements we've been discussing. So that's ensuring that you've got a fire risk assessment in place. The actions coming out of that fire risk assessment have been managed. Your maintenance requirements are being fulfilled, that you're doing your in-house checks, that your training is in place. Those are all the sort of things that fire marshals should be overseeing and helping you manage at practice level. The number of fire marshals you require will be dictated by the assessment again, and a lot of factors will come into play, like the size of your premises, the complexity of your premises, how many hazards you have in place. But essentially, you should always have at least one trained fire marshal on site at all times. So you'll need to consider shift patterns, rotas, holidays, absences, and come up with a suitable number of marshals to make sure you've got that cover present. And then fire awareness training. So again, it's a requirement under the Reform Act that all team members have a form of fire safety awareness training. That training must be undertaken when they first start employment, and must be repeated periodically throughout the employment. So again, this is an area that practices go wrong on, they don't put in place, and we'll explore that now as part of the inspection trends feedback. So we can have a look at the quotes here and see that fire training comes up quite a lot where there hasn't been a mechanism or system in place to ensure team members are routinely trained on this. So quite a few here, just leave that for a few seconds just for you to read over. But that shows you what they're looking at and what particular areas of concern they're flagging up as part of their reports. So just to summarize everything I said on fire safety, you must have a suitable fire risk assessment in place. That fire risk assessment should really be done before everything else, because that then links into everything else that comes after it. It will link into the type of fire alarm you need, the type of emergency lighting system you need, how many fire marshals you need, the specific fire procedures you need in place. So that provides the foundations for everything else to follow. So make sure you've got that in place. Then ensure, like I've just said, you have your firefighting equipment, you have your alarms, you have your emergency lighting, and they're suitable for your needs. Ensure all equipment is maintained and you're doing your visual testing and inspection in-house, and you're documenting that as well for evidence for the inspection perspectives. Ensure you have a bespoke fire emergency procedure in place. All staff are trained on that procedure, and that all staff are provided with fire awareness training throughout their employment. And then finally, ensure that you do have a suitable number of fire marshals in place to oversee all of this that I've just explained as part of this training, this webinar. So, look, I just want to go into how we can help you here. Now, a pop-up will appear on your screen now if you're not an iComply member. But if you are an iComply member or an iManage member, we did a big review of our fire safety document set in May this year on the back of the trend analysis I showed you at the start of this webinar. So we identified that this is becoming more of a focus now as part of the healthcare inspection regime. They're looking at fire. All these sort of quotes that I showed you, we've established that, we've digested it, and in May we released we evolved and adapted our fire-related document set to encompass all those sort of trends. And all the documents that are listed there, you can see. So if you're an iComply member or an iManage member, you will have access to all of these. And these are intended to help you fulfill all the requirements that I've just explained as part of this webinar. So you will have a fire safety overview. I've rewritten this overview, and that overview provides the how, the why, and what you need to do to put those things in place. It goes into a lot more detail of what I've just explained in this webinar, and it's intended to provide you with a user guide, step-by-step information on how to do things. So it's very, very useful. And if you remember, I recommend you read that guide to help you understand your requirements and what you need to do. We've created a fire safety policy to show to inspectors what you were doing to comply with the reform order. We have in the system got a fire risk assessment. So it's important to understand that that assessment in the system is intended for people who feel competent to do it. So they can use that template, but if you don't feel competent, we strongly advise you outsource that assessment to an external third party. You can, however, use the fire risk assessment for ongoing reviews. So once you've done your official assessment, identified all the precautionary measures you need, and put all those measures in place, you can then use that template to ensure that those measures remain relevant and that they remain applicable to you. We've got a fire action notice. We've got a fire precautions test form. So if you haven't got a designated fire logbook, you can use a test form to record your in-house checks. We've got a fire drill record to again show to inspectors that you're doing your drills and you're learning from them. We've got a fire emergency evacuation plan. So I've tailored a plan for practices to use, which lists out all the procedures that I mentioned earlier. But you need to have a look at that plan and tailor it for your practice. So change all the information on there to make it bespoke to you. Hopefully you won't need to adapt a lot of it, but there will be certain areas that you will have to make it applicable to your circumstances. And we've also got the standard emergency evacuation plan for vulnerable or disabled people as well. So quite a lot of documents in that set to help you now comply with the requirements of the reform order as well as the healthcare inspection trends. So I hope you found that of use. Thank you.